Hello, everyone. I'm Carol Waller. I'm the Executive Director of the Type Directors Club, and we're thrilled that you're here today. The TDC competition, the TDC68, which is the communication sign, these are the judges we have here today. And the deadline for both typeface sign and communication sign is next Friday, January 21st. So make sure you get those entries in. And don't forget young ones, which are the students, also make sure you get it in because it's the same judges that will be judging your work. Also, just so you know, in February, February 4th, Kelsey Gray will have her class on Let's Make Type Letters together. Then we have a program on the 15th with Mark Dwayne from Singapore about family relationships, community, and collectivism within typographic practice. And on the 17th, we have Type, which is about how to make chaos, type foundries, developmental stages. And a past president of the Type Directors Club, Matteo Belloni, will have his infamous class about non-type designers learning to design typefaces. And that's on March 12th, 11th and 12th. Okay, not going to wait any longer. I'm very excited to meet all the judges. And I'm going to introduce Joe Newton, co-chair of the TDC Advisory Committee. Joe?
Thanks, Carol. Greetings, everyone, and thank everybody, thank all of you online for coming to sit in on this session with us. I'm really pleased to be here today. As Carol mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the TDC board and also the co-chair of this communication design committee. Unfortunately, my co-chair for the committee, Manija Imran, was under the weather today and couldn't attend. So feel better, Manija. So today what we're here for is to give you guys a chance to hear from this year's design judges, get some perspective of how they think, and just generally have a conversation about the state of the industry, typography, education, competitions, even whatever the subject matter leads to. Of course, you viewers, we welcome you to submit your questions and comments through the Q&A feature in Zoom. Traditionally, we've brought all the judges together in person, which is always great for everybody to get to know each other. But the pandemic has really put that, put a damper on that, made it impossible, really. The upside, of course, is how much more accessible this is worldwide for everybody. And for us as a club, we can invite greater numbers and a greater variety of judges in ways that we could just never afford to do. So this year, we're fortunate to have people in New York, Los Angeles, Virginia, Paris, London, Heidelberg, Tehran, South Africa. We have 11 judges in total and a smaller group with us here specifically today. So we're not going to look at the work from all these wonderful people, but we will drop their links into the chat and then later send a follow-up email also with the links for the judges who are not on the panel today, so you can be inspired and see what they're bringing in terms of their shrewd aesthetics and sharp eyes. These are the people who are going to help us determine what the world's best typography looks like this year. And as Carol said, just a reminder that deadline for entry, January 21st, Friday, so just about 8 days, I think. It's simple to find, tdc.org/enter. That'll take you to the right spot. Unless you are a student, and then I think there's a different link, but you can get to it from that page. And the type design competition, as Carol mentioned, there's an event the 19th. And what's exciting about that is we've added a bunch more judges there as well. So this competition usually has about 6 or 7 judges. We have 11 this year. The type competition usually has 6 or 7, and they have 14. And the really great aspect of that is this year we've added judges explicitly for Arabic, for Indic script, for CJK, Chinese, Japanese, Korean. And we've always had a panel of experts to address those languages, but now we have it kind of in-house as part of the team. We have this deeper, richer team of experts from across the globe So we've always accepted all those scripts for the competition, but now we're even better able to do that. So any of you who are interested in entering there, this is like the best year ever, especially if you're working on scripts from other parts of the world and not just Latin scripts. So that's pretty exciting, I think. So we have today on this panel 5 of the 11 communication design judges. I'm just going to have everybody introduce themselves, and I'll be throwing out some questions to get things started. My intention is just a conversational feeling. You know, Zoom is always a little awkward for that when you have multiple people, but we'll do the best we can. So the questions are just to help prime the pump. Don't feel like you have to stick to answering those questions. Change the subject all you want. And thank you all so much for being here. I'm going to just start at the top left of my screen and just suggest, Anil, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, Hi, I'm Anil with a dotless I, which is a unique letter for Turkish language. I'm a London-based graphic designer, but I am, as I mentioned, from Istanbul, Turkey originally. And I hold a BA, MA in graphic design and a PhD in typography. And in the last 6-7 years, I have been working as a graphic designer at Barnbook Design Studio. And at Barnbook, we work with a variety of clients across the globe and projects of varying scales. For example, we oversee the brand identity and environmental graphics of Art Basel to our much discussed David Bowie album covers. But my focus is in editorial design mostly, and books. And I work for Phaidon, Rizzoli, Thames Hudson, Somerset House, on Victoria Albert Museum. And maybe, as you may realize and recognize and see, I am very interested in also music. So I have an audiovisual side project called Fragile Self. So I'm a member of this electronic band. And I'm very happy to meet you today and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. How about Osmond?
Thank you. I'm Osmond Schumer. I was born, but currently right now I am in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm a graphic designer, but also co-founder and creative director of Mam'gobozi Design Factory, a design studio that celebrates the African identity. So with all the clients that we get, our main focus is to create work that that speaks and literally talks or celebrates everything or anything African. So which is kind of challenging, but we make it work. Like we're getting clients from all around the world, and the practice is still the same. Africa, that is literally in our DNA, and I dabble in typography. That is me, Osmond Schumer. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Antonio.
Hi, thank you for including me in this program. I've been in the design field for a number of decades. I got an undergraduate degree in history, but a graduate degree in graphic design from the Yale School of Art. I came down to Virginia for a job and left it after a year and started my own studio. So for over 30 years now, I've been had a graphic design studio, but also simultaneously I've been an instructor, first at the Corcoran College of Art and Design, then at the MICA in their graduate program, and currently doing guest critic visits with different schools like Pratt and SVA. Primarily, my practice deals with the museum community here, mostly in the Washington, D.C. community, and doing a lot of print work primarily. But then the other thing that gets a fair amount of recognition these days is I do a lot of stamp design. I work as an art director for stamp development at the United States Postal Service. And the nice thing there is you can do a design and it gets printed in quantities of 300 million and gets distributed everywhere around the country and eventually sometimes around the world. So that's a very exciting opportunity. I love typography, so I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Götz.
Hi there. My name is Götz Gramlich, and first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a big honor being part of the jury panel. I follow your work for a really long time, and I have been a lucky winner. I don't know, 2 or 3 times, and it's really a fantastic experience and a fantastic club. And yeah, being part of this is something really special for me. So thank you again, Joe, and the whole company.
So happy to have you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm 47 years old. I have 2 small children, and I'm live and work in Heidelberg in the south of Germany. I have a small studio. I work in the whole field of graphic design. I do corporate design, product design, but also a lot of stuff for cultural institutions like opera houses, big theater houses, and I love to work on posters for 2 decades right now, and I'm still in love with the kind of medium. For me, it's something very special. Maybe we want to talk about it later on. I also enjoy silk screen printing by myself. This is kind of a hobby, and if it's not too difficult, I give it to some printers, of course. And I also do teachings from time to time. The last time I had a guest professorship at the Bauhaus in Weimar. I was teaching experimental typography, and besides all of that, I'm a lucky member of the Allianz Graphique International.
Very impressive. And Kelly, bring us home.
I was like, am I the last one? I think I am.
Yep, there's just 5 of us today.
Yeah, it's nice to meet everybody who I can see and those that I can't, who are also attending. So thanks for being here. I'm Kelly Walters. I'm also an artist and designer. I have my own studio practice. It's called Bright Polka Dot. And I do a lot of kind of work that looks at race and representation and supporting artists who are navigating race and representation. So that comes in the form of exhibitions. I've done a lot of work in I'm currently actually working on an exhibition right now at Parsons School of Design called With a Cast of Colored Stars that is looking at forms of Black popular entertainment, the historical sort of legacy of print media, and looking at typography in that print media and imagery. I am also associate director and assistant professor at Parsons School of Design as well. And so I've been teaching for a number of years, and it's exciting to sort of navigate and learn design all over again with my students in the classroom. So that's another sort of aspect to my practice. And then the third piece that I'll just highlight too is just thinking about publishing and how writing can contribute to talking about these themes around race and representation as well. And so I have an upcoming co-edited book with a few other designers called The Black Experience in Design. So I'm plugging that one, which will be out on February 1 with an amazing editing crew that I'm working with: Anne H. Berry, Kareem Kali, Leslie Ann Knoll, Penny Laker, and Jennifer Rittner are my co-editors on that book. And it's just another sort of testament of like working in collaboration with other designers and artists, thinking about how to elevate voices that have often been marginalized. So, so that's a little snapshot, I would say, of some of the things that I'm doing in my neck of the woods.
Amazing. And Kelly has joined us a couple of times recently. If you go to our YouTube channel, you should be able to find recordings both of a panel discussion that you were leading, and then preceding to that, you talking about some of your work, I believe. So the YouTube channel's there. That's free for everybody. Lots of great accessibility in that regard, like all sorts of great information and ideas there for everybody. All right, well, I thought we'd just start with something pretty broad, and this can really mean anything you want, but I was going to say, what is the current state of affairs out there? What's the state of design and typography? What kind of things are you seeing and getting excited about, or new things that you feel like you're being able to do that you couldn't do before, but just sort of your general vibe about where you feel things are typographically right now?
I mean, everything is kind of melting together, and it's getting faster and faster. So I think I'm excited, like everyone else, I bet, about variable fonts, more and more web fonts coming along, animated type in all forms, interactive stuff that kind of combine different media. And for me personally, I really appreciate the melting together from analog and digital. So that's a lot of joy for me, especially when I think about posters, for example.
Are you liking the idea that you can do it in both mediums at once? There could be a print version and an animated version, for example.
Yeah, for example, I actually plan a new campaign for a culture house, and I can bring so many stuff in a printed piece of paper and a poster on it. Like I have QR codes, and these QR codes go link to a whole link tree, and I can put so much stuff, information on it, and I also can give it an animated version, which I can view with different AR tools like Artivive or Adobe Aero, or there's a lot of stuff. So and the whole created stuff I can use also for other media installations. And yeah, it's I think for us we are kind of visual narrative people. We get a lot of new possibilities to play out our best cards.
Yeah, when I am talking about it, I like to use the analogy of the sort of expanding universe. And it seems to be that, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, maybe there was this big bang with photo lettering that's all of a sudden expanding to computers and the technologies and AR and everything now. And it used to be very confined and narrow and limited, and now it's expanded in every different direction to all different people. So many people can participate in it, which is very exciting. I think it makes it a super exciting field. It certainly makes it a little bit more difficult to have any absolutes about what is good and what is bad. But I think it still merits the investigation.
I think, the state of design, I mean, it is not an easy question, but I think not more difficult than thinking about the future of design of typography. It is the question I don't like to answer. I think the state of design and typography really follow the society. It is definitely not separate than how we live, think, or interact. So I think on one hand, it has been commercial, like we all are. But on the other hand, I think there are more diverse individual and cultural approaches to it today. And I think because of the social media, they are more exposed, and we can easily actually access them. And if we want to, we can get influenced by them, by these, diverse individual approaches. So we don't have to follow one direction. This is especially important for the new graduates. So they don't have to go to one particular way, like, for example, commercial route or whatever. So corporate routes. So there are more options, and we can see them maybe easier today. But what excites me most today is the kind of the really experimental typefaces around, which is definitely excites me most, because I think there are really many new type foundries around, and really interesting people around, like collectives or individual people. They really design interesting, really experimental typefaces, which is back, I think, after a little bit of corporate typography era, I can say. Yeah.
Yeah, true. True. I agree with Anil, and also the issue of social media. I think, like, personally, like, from my space, because I'm mostly looking into Africa, because of the accessibility of the internet now. Like, many African designers are able to experiment, and actually, I think for me, it's that instead of looking to Latin writing system or the Latin alphabet, it's almost like many Africans are now looking into going back into history and literally experimenting with ancient African writing systems that were once deemed not writing systems. But so then that for me is kind of interesting, because then that shows that in the next few years, we will be judging like African writing systems literally as a category, because there's literally a movement of literally digitizing a writing system that was like 200 years old, even same as literally in Funduga's book. And there's a lot of young African designers who are literally experimenting, going back, and like most of these things you really can't find it like in books, but there are very few books or like very few journals, and people are going deep and literally looking at all those archives, trying to almost like find their own part in typeface design, or literally creating like their own style. So yeah, I'm pretty sure in the next few years there will be like a new category of like, oh wow, like what do we call this? But yeah. I think that for me excites me, and also experimental typefaces. Like I like that. I love that, because I think it's I think that is what I usually I do like all the time. Literally, like, it's quite fun and very. There's no rules sometimes to it. So and of course there are rules sometimes. So yeah.
Or so to me, I think like typeface is the ultimate set of rules, because it requires it or it won't hold together. So
exactly.
So how do you make something experimental when so many things are required just to make it functional? But that's completely fascinating.
Yeah.
I just jump in for a second and say, like, it doesn't always have to be functional either. I think that there are plenty of instances where you're looking for something that maybe is going to be a challenge and is difficult to read. So,
yeah,
I mean,
I'm also a big fan of the great hike and the foggy areas between readability and type-driven form, or maybe arts and design. That's super interesting. And these kind of new scripts from Africa, as which you told us, it's super fascinating. And I bet you are connected with Saki Mafundikwa.
Yes, I am.
Of course. Yeah.
The other thing I was just going to say and sort of echo on that is just, I think, in terms of thinking about the current state, it's just like the center is different. There's multiple centers. And like, just as folks have already mentioned here, like the starting point, the origin doesn't have to be what was. And there's a lot of interrogation, a lot of reflecting, and a lot of like, rethinking of like what once was. And I think that's an exciting aspect of like where design has headed, because I think it's freeing in a lot of ways of like not having to have it look like this, to do that thing, to function in this way, that's the expected way. And so I'm excited for having multiple like kind of centers and origin points, because what it's creating is like new histories for us now that aren't all based on the same one. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
There's the thing that the TDC has long claimed to be a champion of, which is excellence. And one of the questions that I think we're really wanting to dig into now is, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Sort of to your point, Kelly, these multiple centers, like any one of them can be excellent. It doesn't, like, it's obviously been so dominated by sort of the Western European design tradition, but there's so many other ways of getting there. And, I'm a big fan of vernacular stuff. And I don't mean that in a condescending, like, oh, that person doesn't have training. I mean, they found their own path to understanding these things. And that's actually kind of where I came from. I didn't go to school for it, but I made tons of stuff from my band. And I just like, oh, I really like graffiti. And so I'm kind of absorbing that. Oh, I really like this. I like these old vintage posters, and absorbing that. But the point to me is that sometimes those things kind of look wrong. Like it's like these experimental typefaces, but sometimes, yeah, they're kind of wrong, but they're kind of amazing. Like somehow this system is holding together, but it's not in the traditional definition of excellence. And I think there's this opportunity now to really expand and redefine what that is.
That's so true. When you mentioned vernacular, it reminded me of something that I talk about oftentimes with students, is that I think one of the most important pieces of graphic design that I often see is out in the community, the one that says lost dog or lost cat. I mean, that's an incredibly, incredibly important piece of graphic design there that's so meaningful. And as long as we know that message, then it works, right? So I think it's important to keep that sort of perspective.
I think, for example, some of the experimental typefaces I'm seeing today, some of them are extremely well crafted. We can't undermine them because they are experimental. Some of them are really good pieces of graphic designs. But I acknowledge that I think types design is a sole profession, which requires, education skills and patience, lots of patience. But also I strongly believe in self-education and dedication. Also, for example, the punk ideal inspires me. Like, anybody can do anything, and this can mean a lot for them personally, but also it can create a whole new way, a new pathway for all of us, and then we can have new ways of seeing letter forms even the world, So I think both are very important. But I think probably self-education, passion and dedication is more important, I think.
Mm. Yeah, we are also in search of the unseen. And of course, it's getting more and more difficult. So I think I prefer also a kind of a non-conformist, maybe punk infantile approach from an unexperienced type designer more than the thousands social media inspired and copy-paste type design. Absolutely. And I also thought about what would be my points to judge excellent work is on the one side, of course, composition excellence in a maybe a traditional way, but also courage for experimental type, or for driving or looking for new approaches, new ways in the visual jungle. I think this is super interesting, and the times are now, and there are so many possibilities to mix stuff, to do experimental approaches. So I'm super excited about what we'll see in the next weeks.
I think as communication design category, a big thing has to, that for me is context. So, you know, it's like, what's the relationship of what we're looking at to what it's trying to communicate? Because something can be extremely, you know, in traditional terms, illegible, but in the particular context that it may be speaking, it may be entirely appropriate. Likewise, you know, the most finely crafted piece of typographic information for, you know, I don't know, but you understand that it depends on the context a lot.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of times, and sometimes that's a difficult thing. And when you judge competitions and there may be so many entries in a limited amount of time to really understand what that context is. But as a judge, I think that's always very important.
Yeah, true.
100%.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for me, experiment like equates to innovation, right? It's like this, it's this search for something new, something different. And context like helps that, almost like craft this part to something. So when you take that context, if it's like a random dot, tomatoes, right? And then if the context is tomatoes and then the experiment then is almost like a path to create a tomato or tomato based typeface or inspired or by the curves, whatever that path is, it can equate to something different. And that is quite refreshing because it's sometimes there's always this continuous thing. Like for example, Helvetica. Helvetica has been Helvetica, school, Helvetica, even a documentary, Helvetica. So then when something fresh comes along, even if it's a let's say it's quite funk and quite different, then it's refreshing to the eyes, like, oh wow, something refreshing. Okay, cool. Let's sit down and talk. Where do you come from? Oh, I'm tomato. Okay, cool, interesting. Like it's something fresh. So it's a different storyline. Yeah, like, and that is what excites me about experiments. Like it's you're trying to find something. You're digging to find that piece of jewel, and some of them are quite simple. Some of them are quite like, oh wow, it's simple and quite crafted, but it's quite experimental. And some of them are quite graphic, and I guess that's the beauty of it, like that scale or that little, yeah.
I think now kind of we started talking a little bit about the competition already. I think concept is very important, isn't it? Like, because it depends what type of typography, what kind of imagery is good for this concept. But first of all, I think strong concept is very important. But of course, the good execution, like it should be well crafted. But yeah, appropriate and interesting way of using the typography. I think that appropriate is important. Like, it depends on the concept again. So yeah, I think this is what makes good communication design project good. The kind of concept is the queen, isn't it? The kind of the good concept.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And concept is based on or concept it has to be part of the context, of course.
Yes.
And finally based on a good idea.
The idea of context was making me think of something that was sort of an eye-opening thought a few years ago. In the neighborhood I live in, it has a lot of, traditionally had a lot of West Indian people. And so you see sometimes festival posters for, reggaeton and things. And there's a certain aesthetic style that from my design tradition, I'm a little bit like kind of raising an eyebrow because it's like 3-dimensional and chrome, and it looks like it was made in Word, and it's like in many ways kind of illegible. But a friend of mine said, well, within the context of that community, they recognize that. So it doesn't, my opinion about, I don't actually like those posters. I just think that in a mechanical sense, they have problems because they're hard to read. But in the context of that community, people recognize it and they know that's for me. That's an event that I'm interested in. And therefore, it is in fact effective, despite the mechanics of it maybe not being as schooled or perfect in that sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely. It's communicating to the audience it's intending to communicate, and probably the messages that they want to communicate.
Yeah. We had a question about trends come in from one of the attendees, and I'll kind of mix that in with the question I had on my list, which is just one kind of, are trends real, or is that something we just sort of fabricate in order to be able to label things? And then how relevant is that to type? I will say that the person who wrote in said, award shows are a great place to see trends in various fields. Are there any trends that you're personally starting to grow tired of so that I can avoid submitting those?
I mean, I do think trends are real. I think they are reflective of like these different markers and periods in design history and or like styles that seem to be working, and it's like, okay, well that works. Let's use this style and sort of lay out to sell the idea or concept. And I think on some hand, like on one hand, I would say like trends are helpful in thinking about format or like types of format, and distinguishing between like, here's this type of trend, here's that type of trend, here's that type of trend. So I think from the standpoint of understanding like a format or a style, I think they can be helpful from distinguishing, like I said, the difference. I think when trends start to be saturating the industry, I think that is a problem. When we're only expecting to see, when we are almost training our audience and our consumers to see it look a certain way, then when we do switch gears, they're like, uproar, this can't work. Like, what did you do? We were expecting this basic look. You know what I mean? And so I think that there's like the ramifications of creating in the same way over and over again and not creating enough of a mixture has a lot of impact on the people who are viewing it and engaging with it. And so I think that there's, thinking about it in that kind of way. But I think in terms of the question, it's hard for me to say like what specifically not to do. It's like, I know it when I see it, but I think, one of the things that I feel is important to sort of contextualize, just to go back to the concept, context sort of part of our discussion, is that, why are you doing it in this way? How does using this trend either serve the idea or push it to another level? Or I would just make it more about a question to yourself, like, is this doing what it needs to do? Or is it doing what I think people want me to do? And I think there's like that kind of distinguishing of like designing for what you expect others to gain from it because it looks a certain way, as opposed to, again, like it really needing to look and feel in a way that's different and unique and unexpected. And I the last thing I'll say too is like, it happens to me too, where I'm like, oh man, like I know it'll quickly be accepted if I do 1, 2, and 3, right? And it's the uncomfortability of choosing, 4, 5, and 6 because people are used to 1, 2, and 3. And so I think a lot of it to me is also, if you feel like this is like a really strong idea, like try to hold on to that part of yourself that feels like it might be right. Because I think that we all have like the anxiety of like making something and then changing gears to fit and conform to a format that we think will be better. So I guess my, biggest takeaway I would say is just try to trust like that your idea works as best you can instead of getting swayed by all the things that are out there.
I think trends are real, yes. Because I think it is the spirit of an era. Like any other cultural activities, actually, in music, in painting, there are trends. And there are certain philosophies, actually, and like aesthetic, which capture the society, concerns and interests of the society. I think it is the important thing. So why not design and typography? So design and typography does the same thing. They express the same concerns and interests of the society. So I think talking about the spirit of an era, definitely there is the trends. Today's trend, yeah, I mean, definitely, Kelly, it is very difficult to define it, but I will go back to this experimental era of the early 90s, because I really feel it is coming back, reacting towards a corporate era, because I think globalization and that we had this era a bit, but now I think, as I said, there are more individualistic, more cultural, diverse approaches to everything, which is really, really exciting moment, I think, again, in design and typography. I feel like we have more options to choose from.
Maybe some of this is also that what you referred to, Götz, the melting together. Like to me, that in a way feels like a trend, not like a momentary thing, but that's sort of part of what's happening now.
Yeah. It's just happening. And also innovation is mostly driven by technology, and technology is expanding very fast. So we'll just see it. And I mean, we ourselves are now working with different type systems. So for me, I'm super interested in Chinese type, also in these African signs, which Saki was super, had a super research on it. For me, it was so frigging interesting. It really exploded my mind, and it also gave me another perspective on my type. And this is also happening right now. And this is super awesome. So I mean, I had a lot of very, very deep feelings about type, because type is it's not only a form, it's a form where we all have very central associations to it, because we are socialized with it. And of course, we can also play with the visual habits of all the recipients, and we can also mix it throughout the cultures. And this is super exciting. But let me just have some words about the trends. So I was asking myself, are trends real? Yeah. But for me, also, trends are as real as certain timeless stuff is real. Like, for example, Frutiger's Universe, or the whole Swiss type design, which is developing day by day, maybe a little bit more slow than otherwise, but therefore with a crazy level of excellence. And so this is also something like a trend for me, but maybe more like a long run, a marathon trend, not a sprint trend.
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, trends are real. Trends are real, and I think I always say, like, I think sometimes the problem with trends is that like everybody now starts to look the same, and then that becomes a problem, like for the brand or like whatever that people are trying to create. And for me, I think it's always about if the trends are going that way, I'm gonna go that way. I'm gonna be the weird one out and then create something totally different. That's better. Because yeah, like every single year there's trends, and you can see them, like especially now. There's now almost like a trend when it comes into some type designs. Yeah, some of them are nice, but I think sometimes it just becomes too saturated. And there's always like one of those that actually, I think for me, the first time that you see a trend, it's always the nice part. But then when it starts to drag, that's when you start becoming too saturated. And it's always, I think for me, it's always better just to go the opposite. If everybody's going all black and white, you go the other way around, like all color. Like if everybody's going color, you go black and white. It's an always simple trick. Yeah, like for me, that is always like the easy way out. Like just like standing out. At least you'll be creating something unique. Yeah.
Or go tomato.
Exactly, tomato, right?
You know, I think the important thing about trends is to realize that, and there was an interesting article just released today by the AIGA on their blog regarding illustration and the Memphis flat style of illustration. And the author sort of commented on how, you know, trends is really just a market force. So if we call it market forces, then we sort of can wrap our heads around it in a different way. I mean, to what Anil said earlier, yes, it is a reflection of our time, but it is also very much a reflection of market forces, or, you know, things like social media and what social media is adept at spreading into different places, and people are adopting them and being able to use them in ways that commercial forces like to take them on because they're fresh or because they're new. But then it's a chain of sort of a market force, not so much anything inherently good or inherently bad in that particular sort of type solution. I think, again, it's all a matter of context and what's trying to be communicated.
Yeah, and the difference between arts and applied arts, which is another name for graphic design here in the German-speaking area, is that applied arts or graphic design has to communicate something. Arts doesn't, and so we have to use the tools of communication, and of course, type is the universal tool to communicate, and of course, it has to reflect the context of the communication. Otherwise, we don't speak to the people we want to reach out for.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, I generally agree with that entirely, but I think that there's certainly in the history of typography, and you look in the 1960s and psychedelia, and there was, you know, there was lots of lettering and color usage that was meant to only communicate to a very narrow sort of audience. And for everybody else, it was sort of saying, we don't want your participation in this. And I think there are many examples in graphic design and typography, even today, where you can say, like, this is communication, but it's not communication for you. Or, you know, I'm using a language that's familiar to me and familiar to the people that I want to speak with. And it may not be appealing. It's like what Joe said before about those posters he saw in his neighborhood. It's not for Joe, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's maybe not communicating the message to Joe, but that's okay because Joe's not.
Right.
But I'm not so sure about it, because here I often have the argument from clients, oh, please, can you make the type bigger? Can you use another font? The people have to recognize it with a speed of 50 kilometers out of the car. And I said, no, that's wrong. We have to make visuals which make people curious, because they will drive by, they won't recognize it, they can't decrypt the information, but they will remember the visual because it was super interesting. And the next time they will see it, they will stop it, or if they walk by, they will look at it, and then they will consume the information. And by the way, also the mechanical poster for the dub sessions also worked this way with Joe. It was kind of maybe not the best composition, but it makes him super curious. So in the end, he got the information, and the design itself communicate with him.
Since we only have a few minutes left, this might be a good last minute to sort of shift into maybe talk a little bit about expectations of things you would like to be seeing. And in many ways, I think we've already talked about that because you're talked about things you're excited about. I'll tie that in with an attendee question here asking about, there's been a trend of more inclusion, more global design, more perspectives, and sometimes that's going to mean type in languages you don't understand. And it might be like me, just like I don't understand that specific cultural visual language, but I do understand the words. But how do you judge and critique something with letter forms that you actually don't understand? I don't read Farsi, so, how do I critique a poster or a book cover or a website with that content in it?
Well, I'll just jump in here. I always tell people that competitions in some way are a fallacy, that really what you should be thinking of them as is not necessarily the Type Directors Club winner, but you're really looking at the Götz, Kelly, and Osmond, Antonio selection. Really, it's just a selection of what the judges, these particular judges, have an affinity for. And like people everywhere, where we've got lots of holes in our backgrounds and blind spots and things that we're partial and impartial to because we're human. And so, we can just try and do our best based on what our sort of experiences are and our judgment. I think the club has selected us because they recognize our experiences and has tried to assemble a group of jurors that come from a varied background in order to have somebody who can speak on behalf or advocate for something that may be less familiar to other people. But it's still just going to be a reflection of those judges. It's no absolute. There'll always be, unless you can sit down with the material for a year and study it carefully and then pass, some very thoughtful judgment on what the political climate is, when it was produced, how is it distributed, who got to see it, what was their response, all these sort of other questions that we can never even consider in a competition. Yeah. There's going to be, errors in selections and blind spots that affect what we choose, but that's just part of, participating in a competition.
If you were to look at this panel right now, if I were an attendee, I'd say I better bust out my most experimental typography because there's a preponderance of favoritism with that. It is part of the reason we added more judges this year, because I think it automatically diversifies. As you said, Antonio, we're trying to pick people who are going to have different points of view. And otherwise, I've seen it other years where it's like, this selection is different than last year's because it's that small group of people and their just whatever that average is of that group, which maybe overlaps a lot or maybe almost not at all. So the more the better in terms of judges in that sense.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say is I think even if one may not necessarily know the language, I feel like, and this is just me, but I feel like I still can feel the work and feel and hear it. And I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, but I'm looking for these sort of universal properties, like how's color engaged with in the design? Where are things placed? You know, it's not just, to me, it's not just the type alone, but like the whole composition as a whole. And I feel like there's ways to still feel a work, if that makes sense. And I'm hoping to feel the work, even if I don't necessarily know all of the pieces. And similarly, just to echo, like, you know, we all are definitely going to have like our own blind spots and have seen and have learned design in lots of different ways and, you know, have a preference towards 1, 2, or 3. But I also would say like my preference in the end doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? I feel like we all, like those who are out there listening, like your preference means a hell of a lot too. So I would just like sort of, again, go back to that. And, you know, we can share our ideas and our ways of viewing this work. But I also think it's important that you feel excited about your work also, despite, you know, what accolades come.
For me, this was a tricky point because, in terms of typography, in my opinion, it is not just important how it looks, but it is very important how it reads. For me, the micro typography, the fine typography is very important. I mean, in my work, or I think when I judge, the micro levels like the line breaks, the paragraphs, letter space, punctuation, how it reads. But yes, of course, if I can't read the script, what am I going to do? I think it's a tricky question. I think I would definitely try to understand or kind of show it to someone else who knows the script and can kind of judge it on behalf of me. But if it is not possible, then I think I would try to get the tone and the character and the kind of historical and connotations of what is used there and how it is used. And then I think I agree with Kelly, like, I would try to get the spirit of the work, because I think the award-winning work should be thought-provoking in this way or other way. It should be a little bit breaking the status quo in design or in society. You know, it should be brave, I think. It can't be just nice, you know. It is not a winning point, I think. A work looks nice and good, well executed. No, it should be definitely brave and have a good spirit, approaching to the subject and problem creator or problem solver in both ways. So yeah, we will see how we are doing.
I always think about a quote that, and I'm sure I'm going to get it wrong, but Susanna Lichko wrote many years ago that says, you read best what you read most. And I think that's very important in terms of, you know, judging other people's works and knowing or trying to evaluate their quality. We, you know, as was referred to earlier, line breaks and letter spacing and whatever, we have our preferences based on what we've worked with. And that's so important to try and understand the context, because maybe somebody's trying to create a different sort of experience for their reader and breaking what we would have called rules or whatnot. It's always a very difficult thing. I mean, anyway, so
I definitely agree, but I think we can tell if someone knows the rules and breaking them, or not knowing the rules and just, you know, making it up. I think there's a difference, and we can tell that. It is definitely, there are the rules we should know, but they are there to break them. So yeah.
I think that's true. I think it's getting much harder to tell.
And sometimes people just get lucky. I see this with my students, where one week they'll turn in something and you're like, oh my God, you're blowing my mind. Like, how are you doing this? This is so advanced and beautiful. And then next week you're like, oh, what is this? Where's the person who was here last week? You know, and they just got lucky. And this is because they're new and they don't have a consistent set of skills. But sometimes you just get lucky and the pieces fall in place and you're like, I mean, that's the magic, right? You know, when you're designing like that, and you're like, I'm gonna put this here, and I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna make this big, and line this up over here, and you're like, oh, that's done. I can't beat it. That's
Yeah, coming back to trends, though, certainly there was a trend in ugly design, so to speak. And so how do you evaluate that, right? So there's an intentionality there that is referencing other aspects of design. And so what criteria are you using to evaluate that ugly design? You know, it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if it's professionally done ugly, it looks different than unprofessionally done.
Yeah.
And if ugly wasn't seen before, it's a valuable trend. If it comes twice or three times, it's just boring. So, I mean, doing opposite or unseen stuff is, thanks God, always a good trend. That brings us all further with our own and our universal visual language.
I'll throw out one thing that we often tell the jurors, and this is just sort of directed to the attendees as well, but the thing that we instruct the jurors to be looking for is for things that really are, in fact, driven by or focused on typography. Because sometimes you'll get something, and this is especially true in person when you have physical objects that are just so beautiful that you get kind of hypnotized. And I've seen things win that later I'm looking at them go, well, here's some, very well set chunk of Helvetica down here in the corner, and then a spectacular image with I've never seen a field of iridescent foil printed that evenly, and you're just literally hypnotized by the beauty of the physical object. But in fact, it's not an exceptional piece of typography. It's a beautiful poster, absolutely, and there's nothing. And then many things don't win because, hey, they're beautiful, but they're not enough about type. So that would be an instruction, I think, also to people who want to submit, is really think about what the type is doing.
And type is related to the content or the message.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one thing I'm excited about here is I've judged some book competitions, which is impossible because, every book you have is 100 pages, 200, 300 pages long. And there's so much that can be nuanced within that book that help communicate a message or defeat a message. And yet you have to go through this long line of books or numerous books online. And a lot of times it ends up being a little bit more about eye candy and what looks really appealing first, as opposed to what's that experience of actually reading that book and trying to absorb that content. I think this sort of competition sort of hopefully we'll get a wider range of entries that allow us to sort of consider that a little bit more easily.
Yeah, the larger number of judges there, again, helps too, because I've seen when you're trying to accomplish all the judging in like a 2.5 day period, sometimes it feels like you're just pushing, okay, next. And then the stuff like that, the complex design systems, it's just hard to spend enough time with it to assess it. And that is the nature of the things that are kind of eye candy have an easier time winning because they just grab you right away. You're like, woo, wow. But presentation of how you submit the stuff, I think, is key. So if you have stuff with subtle details, trying to showcase those in the images you submit is helpful to try to draw the judge's attention to particular details that are powerful.